Welcome to Casual Cafe. It's August 31st, 2012, and we are going to do a recovery update for John Taylor Gatto and that project, and we're also going to do a little research discussion tonight. Thank you for hanging out. I'm joined in studio by Lisa Arborcheski and Kevin Cole, and on the Skype, I've got Nick Albrick in Australia with about a 3-second delay, thanks to Skype, and Tony Myers in Pennsylvania. How you doing, guys?
Sorry, I had to unmute there. I'm doing well. How are you doing, Rich and Kevin and Lisa and Nick?
Great. I figured it would take Nick 3 seconds just to respond. So how you doing, Nick?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Rich. How are you?
I'm good. I'm going to cut out these delays in post-production. So if you're watching this live, then you won't see these when we're done with the reproduction where we improve the sound quality and oftentimes the overall quality of the show, because sometimes doing a live show, things happen that aren't planned, and we already had to do it Jerry Mulligan and do a do-over after a minute and 40 seconds about 20 minutes ago. But I'm happy to say that we've been overcoming some of the technical difficulties presented by the Ustream software, which I like to call the FUstream software, but we'll save the adult language for later in the show because at this point we probably have a lot of people watching who want the update on our recent visit to see John Taylor Gatto. And I'm happy to say that he sounds better. So when speaking to him, his voice is stronger. Since we've left there, the update would be that he's internalizing the supplements and he really enjoys some of the supplements, which is a great sign. And what are the details, Lisa? Let's go to the person with the notes and get the actual dates we were there and the supplements we dropped off and the people that we need to thank for sending various aspects of this. So now I'm going to switch the camera over and put Lisa in the hot spot.
We went there last Wednesday, was it? The 22nd?
Yeah, that sounds about right. It was last Wednesday, yeah.
Yeah.
Last Wednesday, the 22nd. We brought them a number of supplies. Kevin Cole came with us. Kevin behind me came with us. And we brought them everything from paper towels and bleach and laundry detergent and cleaning supplies. We told them about the fundraiser and let them know about the chip-in that Rich created and everyone in the community who has donated thus far. And we also were able to bring them a check for $3,000 from Melissa Simeon's dad, Mike Reynolds, the fireman that we had mentioned, the fire chief that we had mentioned, I think, in the first episode where we talked about John and Janet.
It would be Gatto briefing number 1 for those of you playing at home.
And he was able to speak with the donors who had he had raised the funds for John to come out to Carlsbad, New Mexico, and speak. And he was able to talk with the donors and let them know about John's situation and get them to release the funds to John and Janet so they could use those funds now. And
before you go any further, John was supposed to speak in Carlsbad, New Mexico in September of 2011, but because of the stroke, obviously he didn't make that engagement, and that money was still sitting in escrow. So we had reached out to Mike and said, look, he's not going to be traveling anytime soon, and is there a way that the donors would allow that to get to him right now for his much-needed recovery? So that's just a shameless what you've been...
So let's see, where are we? With regard to the food and supplements that we brought, Robin Gentry McGee, who is the holistic health consultant who helped us to navigate through the nutritional supplements that John might need given his diabetes and the various medications he's on, etc., the stroke, and I think I had mentioned Liquid Hope in the first Gatto briefing. She made a batch of Liquid Hope and sent us 4 containers. I'm not sure if I talked about this or not, but what she had to go through just to get us this food was pretty remarkable. She's about an hour from the nearest city, and so she had to go in and out to buy a cooler and dry ice and then go home and package everything up and then go back out into the city and bring it and have it shipped. But she did all of that and donated it to John and Janet, and I brought that with us. And he was very excited. She sent me the list of ingredients. So I read the entire list off to John, and I was thinking to myself, I don't know what he's going to be thinking, because it's I have it here, but I won't try and find it right now. But he was hanging on my every word, was he not? He was paying close attention.
And Janet was familiar with many of the things in there, so.
Yeah, exactly. And so they were excited about it. And then I pulled out my little list. I had these instructions for Janet with the. We brought the One World Way protein powder for him, and it's this vanilla protein powder. I'm sure Tony could probably give more information about the specifics of why it's such a great protein powder, but he did all of that research.
Supplements we got him or not. I mean, I could go over a rundown of like why we got him, what we got him, and like what Robin suggested to us and how we amended it a little bit based on other recommendations from members in the community. It's essentially, it's not an either or, it's an also and, because what we're dealing with here is we're trying to get him renutrified, and renutrification isn't just a vegan or a vegetarian method. It also needs healthy animal fats as well. And so I find it to be an also and. So he needs the phytonutrients from Robin's food, raw food. A lot of it's sprouted raw food, which gives phytase, an enzyme which helps break down phytic acid. Right. So these sorts of things are extremely important because they're super high antioxidant foods, and they're easily absorbable. The other thing, though, we have to consider, there's an amazing amount of information concerning good animal fats. And I noticed John, for the first time in his life, wanted milk in his coffee. So when we went with the One World Way, essentially because it's grass pasture, or it's pastured cows. So they're on a grass pasture from an Amish farm. And it gives all the sources from which they receive this whey, or how they go about making this whey. And this whey in particular has a true cool process where basically there's no heat associated. It's from raw milk, pastured cows, and it has a full complex of all the different proteins are needed, including glutathione. I think that's what it's called, which is a major component in raw milk, which makes it such a brilliant protein complex for the human body. So at the end of the day, we decided to go away from a protein powder that's not a vegetable base or a starch base like a brown rice protein, which aren't bad, but I just find them not to absorb as well. And so we went with something like One World Way to combine the aspect of good, healthy animal fats and proteins with the phytonutrients. Then he seems to really be responding to the whey. It's something that's easy for him to get down. And that's one of the things I thought, I know Robin suggested would be a major improvement, as well as with the fish oils and other supplements. So it becomes, when we go down the world of supplement in the health industry, or if you want to call it that, it becomes it's very difficult to navigate without having a method to try to figure out exactly what your body needs and when it needs it, how much it needs it. And because we're all a little bit different, we all have different epigenetic triggers which cause different sorts of like my sister, for example, was telling me how people have a certain gene that causes them to be more prone for certain types of cancer than if you eat broccoli and cauliflower. Because of that one type of gene, it will lower your risk. But most people don't even have the gene to begin with. So broccoli and cauliflower, it's kind of a moot point. So they're still very good for you. But, a lot of these considerations handed down by the allopathic community just don't fit in with the way our bodies work. Naturally. So we need to kind of understand and work with forces, not fight forces. And what I noticed with the allopathic community, and a lot of times even with naturopaths and whatnot, is they seem to fight fire with fire rather than work with what works for that individual. So what we're trying to do is tailor as best we can based on John's needs. Like having different, for example, Robin provided wonderful support and help with her recommendations. We just amended a little bit of what we decided to get for John, according to his specific needs. And so we got him cod fish liver oil, fermented cod fish liver oil, mainly because fish livers are polyunsaturates, and when they're heated, that becomes oxidized and becomes carcinogenic. So it's very important to have something that's fermented in that case. And so that's the main two extremely important supplements we got on the whey and the fish oil to help balance out his diabetes, as well as with the Garden of Life. It's like a raw vegetable superfood, a lot of sprouted grains, actually not sprouted grains, sprouted nuts and seeds, which contain phytase, which is the one that helps break down some of the demineralizing aspects of phytonutrients. And I think that's an extremely important supplement. I also do want to consider the fact that we all tested this on ourselves. We just didn't take Robin. And although we do trust Robin's advice, there's no way still yet we could ever go about administering this to John without at least testing it ourselves and making sure it's safe and useful, and it doesn't seem to cause us any sorts of issues or major differences, at least from a healthy person's standpoint. And so we did test all this stuff, and we found actually in pretty good results thus far, starting with the whey especially. And we're now... Right.
Sorry, we'd also gotten him the Tangy Tangerine, the multivitamin complex, which we've been taking now for several months. And so we've definitely tested that out. And then I would say the only other thing that you haven't mentioned is the Sweeties, which is also a longevity product. And it's chromium and vanadium. And it's supportive herbs, but essentially it's supposed to help balance out his diabetes.
All right. And so for my part of the show, I have to say that even though we had been using the longevity products, that wasn't necessarily what we were going to get for John. What we wanted to find was best in market, and in that case, the One World Whey, that's a completely different company, and like Tony said, it's cold processed and et cetera, et cetera. It's the best we can find on the market right now. The Sweeties, which Dr. Glidden and Dr. Wallach talk about, the chromium and vanadium are trace minerals that your body is deficient of, and thus that couples with all this toxic food that people are buying, and that creates this hyper diabetes epidemic that we see. So none of us had tested that, but we're not administering anything. Everything is delivered to Janet, explained to Janet and John at the same time. We have footage of that, and the goal is to make sure that everyone involved, including the nurse's aide that's there, Tanya and Edgar, and anyone else that's in and out of that situation, is as educated as they can be on these topics, because the allopaths, the MD doctors that John's been seeing, or have been leaving him for dead rather, they are not intelligent in these matters. So we really have to take it upon ourselves as individuals to learn about this for ourselves, for our own health. That's why we use ourselves as guinea pigs far before we were doing guinea pig experiments, far before we even knew that John needed this type of assistance. But in his serious state of health, we aren't going to get him a whey product and then not try it for ourselves. We're not going to get him any sort of phytonutrients and not try them for themselves. So I've been taking the Garden of Life, mixture, that concoction. It's a green powder, and even though they make a chocolate flavor, it's still green. So I'm still, but I'm working through it, and I feel a lot healthier since I started taking some of these things in the past couple of weeks, especially the One World Whey. And the bulletproof coffee. Can we talk about the coffee? We didn't even turn John on to the coffee yet. We just wanted to continue experimenting, amongst ourselves. This is something that Jan had brought up when I said I was recounting John's diet, and I said, he likes coffee, so that's a good thing. How can we make that healthy? And Jan said, there's this guy called the Bulletproof Executive, and he's a Silicon Valley executive who has basically spent $250,000 hacking his own body, in a bio type of way. So he's biohacking his body, understanding what his body needs and how to burn fat and how to stay healthy. And so I checked out this coffee, and basically it's not the coffee itself. You can use your own organic coffee. The key is adding this special type of Irish butter called Kerrygold butter. So if you can find this butter, you add it, and then this other MCT oil, which Tony, I'm sure, will take a moment to explain. You add this to your coffee. I like to blend it. It comes out like a frothy cappuccino. It's super healthy for you, apparently, and it gives you energy all day, not just for like a half hour. So go ahead, Tony. I'm gonna
well,
go ahead.
I have 1 cup in the morning, and that's really the only cup of coffee I need. And it doesn't. There happened to be a morning where I had a cup of this bulletproof coffee, and then for various reasons, I was running around all day, and I didn't have a chance to eat until later in the afternoon, and I didn't have that empty feeling that I would normally have had I just had coffee in my stomach. So something about the fat and
it's a healthy
whatever
fat.
Tony's going to tell us about the MCT
Well, and I also
oil.
want to say that Bulletproof Coffee, like, there's nothing you can buy that's not a product. It's basically a recipe, and it's about learning how to get the good type of fats into your
Right.
body early in the day, and how to take something that's otherwise you're filling with pasteurized milk and sugar and all these other things. Like, I used to not drink coffee, but then when I started drinking coffee again, because I drank coffee back when I worked in a corporation, but for years I didn't drink it. And then I started drinking it again. Next thing you know, I'm up to like 4 cups a morning. And then Jan says one day, he's like, did you apply the trivium to that process? You should take a look at that. Why are you drinking 4 cups? Do you need 4 cups? What is your body like? So, okay, now I have a question, but no answer. And then, months later, we happened to ask him about this situation with Gatto. And he's also, who knew Jan was such a coffee researcher? But, thanks for that, because we're all finding it very useful. Okay, Tony, what is MCT oil, and what else did I forget to add into that story?
MCT oil is actually a term to delineate what we call medium chain triglycerides, or just essentially fatty acids. They're medium chain fatty acids, and it's the way we assimilate those fatty acids into our bodies and use them for energy. And it goes essentially 66% of coconut oil, I believe, is made up of MCT oil, these medium chain fatty acids. And ultimately, the evidence is becoming overwhelming now. It seems to not only help calorie burning and fat burning, but it helps essentially process, calorie burning, weight loss, also seems of promoting fat oxidation and reduced food intake. And this has been kind of known for a while. Medium chain fatty acids are what make coconut oil such a miracle. It actually speeds up your metabolism. You end up starting to burn more fat. You have way more energy. And that's the key. Essentially, it assimilates with our body perfectly. There's not extra processing that needs to... There's not extra processing that needs to by the body in order. It pretty much goes right into the cell walls and can be assimilated immediately, and that's unbelievable for a fat. So coming from that standpoint, it's becoming. I know for a fact I used to weigh about 50 pounds. I was 50 pounds heavier than what I was when I started changing my diet to just healthy saturated fats, especially coconut oil. I started noticing a massive difference. And I attribute it to be one of the I've argued coconut oil to be the healthiest oil consistently, and I still kind of hold to that today, especially now knowing what MCT oil is. It's just the medium chain triglycerides, which make coconut oil so healthy to begin with. And it's just the way our bodies assimilate this. It's just perfect. We are made for this sort of oil. So it provides extremely high energy, calorie burning. It burns fat, and it's a saturated fat. It's just like a different way. It's the chain is. The carbon chain is constructed. So it's interesting. You get a little bit into chemistry. And if people really want to dive into the fats, there's a wonderful discussion I posted actually from the Western Price tradition. And if anyone's not familiar with the Western Price tradition, Western Price, Dr. Western A. Price was a dentist who traveled to a bunch of indigenous communities around the world in the early 1900s, discovered that essentially they had perfect jaw lines, and they didn't have any decaying or rotting teeth. And, this is kind of contrary to what we understand in Western culture, where we eat a high grain diet and we have a lot of processed foods. Even back then, it was not the type of diet that indigenous cultures obviously were eating, which they were going after healthy animal organs and that fats. They always sought out the fats first, and they always seem to ferment. Many cultures fermented their grains, which is extremely important. All these sorts of functions. So I posted a discussion about it's called the Skinny on Fats. It's in the health group, and that kind of goes over the whole history of the lipid hypothesis, how fats are assimilated into the body from saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated, and how they affect our bodies differently. And I think that breakdown of understanding how fats affect our bodies might be one of the greatest sources of information how we can start making a positive change in the right direction, because one of the greatest issues and one of the greatest problems, it seems to be, is just our intake of polyunsaturates and the oxidation occurring with that. So there's a lot of things that if we just just like with everything we're discovering now, it takes a lot of research and it takes a lot of time. It's a values change and a habits change. So I don't really like to force the issue, but the information's there for people that if they find this interesting, there's a lot of good, credible, scientifically backed up information that presents a different side of the story. And then if you add into the Flexner report, and the Rockefeller Foundations, and essentially the amalgamation of the allopathic community in the early 1900s, like 1920s, 1930s, then it all starts to paint this picture of essentially why everything is backwards. Why are they telling us not to eat the saturated fats and go after all these polyunsaturates, which they're essentially saying is what's causing these chronic illnesses that have become so exacerbated and out of control in our society. It's ironic because I told my friend about the bulletproof coffee today. He's a heavy weightlifter, and he's telling me how he's eating a super high carb diet right before he works out. And I'm like, you're going to kill yourself. You're going to burn out. I mean, I'm sorry. At the end of the day, my sister and I used to do that, and we had severe episodes of dizziness, severe stomach cramping, because essentially you're loading up on sugar, using all that sugar, and then not eating anything or restoring anything after the workout. And so it was always something I don't take for too lightly. So I sent this to him, and he's like, what's the science behind this? What's the evidence? How dare they, and it's interesting. So it's something I don't like to force on people because, or even talk about it, because diet's such an issue, and people are so, the diet recommendations that we've had to go through and try to work out ourselves are complete opposite of what the allopathic community is suggesting. 100% opposite. And when I'm looking at John's condition and what he seems to be starving, the type of nutrients for which he seems to be starving, it's pretty obvious to me what's going on in that community. They're wonderful immediate care, but as far as chronic care, I mean, it only took a year to see what happened. So,
well, and what they're missing is Sally Fallon's work. I mean,
Mary Enig and Sally Fallon.
Video, The Oiling of America. Right. So there's the video that you can find online called The Oiling of America, which is Sally Fallon Morell. What's her last name? She has a new last name. It used to be Sally Fallon. Jan's interviewed her, and she reminds Jan several times that she has a new last name. But the point is, her work is solid, and we've all looked at it, and we've kind of waded our way into it because we don't like to make any quick changes. We like to learn and slowly integrate, and our bodies are a living thing, so you can't do anything, too sudden. But when we are all suffering from malnutrition as a function of corporate farming and GMO products and all this sort of thing, it does pay to educate yourself about what your body needs every day, and then to figure out how to get your body what it needs and to cut out the excess. And I think that most of the people who, we see as being adversely affected by the corporate food, those are people who also aren't in the process of yet learning what all these things are that we're putting into ourselves. Because we were conditioned in a terrarium to believe that everything in the grocery store is good to eat, especially that candy at the checkout aisle as a kid, right? That's why they put it there. It's all clever marketing. And what
our palates have been engineered.
These places are combined. Sure. These places are engineered, the supermarkets especially, by people far smarter than the people shopping many times in those places. So there's advanced psychological warfare going on, not just in a grocery store, not just in your water tap, not just in your mailbox and on your TV and all these other places, your newspaper. I mean, that's what they mean by total war or full spectrum dominance. They're attacking us from all angles. And so the first thing we all have to do as individuals is start to learn for ourselves, get that process of learning and curiosity turned on so that we can start asking these questions that lead to substantial and valid answers quicker and quicker throughout our day. And then once you have some of those answers, I mean, once you've really thought them out, those are pretty solid. You won't have to think about them. Always reevaluate them and make sure that you're still accurate. But the point is that there's a lot of thinking up front, but then after that, it's just a consistent method of thinking through every action before you take it. Because if you don't, for sure, you're stepping into the paradigms of control that these people have planned out for us, and they're very smart. It's like being in a very advanced holographic video game, and it's just gotten too ludicrous to believe that this is actual reality. So maybe we should consider that for. Okay, that was long enough. Anyway, getting back to our health and learning.
Well, I just want to say also about the supplements is that what we're doing is just getting John the basic nutrition that he needs. This is just nutrient-dense food and supplements, and until Janet brings him to the physician and has updated blood work, etc., we won't really be able to work with the physician and Robin and a couple of other people who are involved, who've written to us, who have experience and expertise in these areas. So we need to figure out some things before we can do more, but at least we have him just getting the basic nutrition. And when I spoke with Janet, I guess it was a few days ago. It's been a very long week. When I spoke with Janet a few days ago, she let me know that John loves the whey protein powder, and he's been requesting it 2 to 3 times a day. So his body is telling him.
It's screaming for protein.
And, right,
screaming for protein, screaming for fat. I'm really thankful that Robin's helping us out with this, because once we get more information, she'll be able to target supplements that will be more specific to his needs at that time. So these are kind of the generalized, like you said, supplements that we're getting for him, the general nutrient categories that he needs in his state or his condition right now. But moving forward, once more information is available, I'm sure we'll be able to get more help in being able to target specifically certain areas that might need to have supplements or not supplements, So that's wonderful that, it's so many people in the community, and this is something that's really been unbelievable. I've reached out with so many different recommendations and so many different ways to help. And that's what's so encouraging, but so creative. Like, I just love the creativity of all the different ways that people are trying, finding ways to help, whether it's just a donation or a donation of nut butters, donation of ideas, a juicer, like all these things have provided so much help for us, even though it's all different ways of helping. And I just like the dynamism and creativity behind like the support we're getting from the community, or just the suggestions. I know Bob and Cicely, they reminded me of the codfish liver oil, the fermented codfish liver oil, which I've tested on myself for a solid year now, and I found it to be extremely useful. So, that was another step. So there's so many people I want to thank, and, and they're still participating and moving forward with help and suggestions. So it's just been unbelievable.
Yeah, and I'd like to mention that Robin Gentry McGee, who sent the Liquid Hope on the dry ice in the cooler that John is enjoying right now. That's Brian McGee's wife. So Brian's in the community. Robin, maybe if you're watching this with Brian, you want to be in the community too. I know you're a busy woman, but I'm just throwing it out there. But I just wanted to make sure that people knew to whom we were referring when we, brought that up, and how we got that connection. Because that's why we have a community, because we're all human beings. We're all experiencing life kind of unscripted, because we are not yet writing our script in life until we ask the questions and stop making ourselves outsourcing our thinking, making ourselves automatons to this collective. And that's what they want. They want to break down individuality. So it's a struggle to get back to your individual self and ask those questions so that you are living your own life and writing your own script. But it's a day-by-day process, and we're all still learning.
Well, it's been really beautiful, the response that we've gotten from the community, because when we took on the responsibility of this project, we just did it without...
the same way we invited John here. We did it without, we knew we needed to do it, so let's just do it.
We thought it through to a degree.
Right.
But
it needs to be done.
But, of course, so many things come up along the way that you didn't expect, and it always is much more responsibility than you initially thought. But so it's taken a lot of the burden off of us and helped us to maintain our balance through this whole process. And Tony, you mentioned the nut butter, so I actually wanted to mention C.O. Lee, who is a member of the Tragedy and Hope community also. And he wrote to me on August 14th, and I really hope he doesn't mind my reading this email. I read it out loud to John while we were there. And he just loved it. And he asked me if I would send it to his publisher, Ingrid. So I did. And it reads, "Dear Lisa, I write this email to you as one of the bigger fans of John Taylor Gatto, Ultimate History Lesson, Tragedy and Hope, etc. Through the past few Peace Revolution podcasts, I became aware of John's current conditions, which simply breaks my heart. When you guys first released the Ultimate History Lesson a couple of months ago, I was beyond excited because I had been waiting on the opportunity to hear and watch the 6-hour interview with John. Needless to say, after viewing the whole interview at least 6 times, I became inspired to follow through with my dream of starting my own brand of organic raw nut butters. The brand, Vermont Raw Nut Butter, is in its 8th month and it is growing. Anyway, in the name of John's recovery from malnutrition, I would like to donate some nut butters as well as some high-quality organic raw superfoods. The nut butters that I produce are processed in a granite stone grounder where the temperature never goes above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which also means that the vital nutrients, minerals, essential fatty acids are preserved in the final product. I would like to donate some raw organic coconut butter, almond butter, cashew butter, macadamia nut butter, and raw tahini, as well as 5 pounds of organic raw maca, as well as 2,000 tablets of chlorella spirulina. Please let me know where I can send these products to. Thank you for your efforts regarding John's recovery. Once again, tragedyandhope.com proves itself to be the best thing on the internet. C.O. Lee. So he sent a huge box full of all these wonderful organic nut butters and everything that I just read off. And as I took each one out of the box and explained to John what it was, Janet was saying, "Oh, well, cashew, that's John's favorite," and she knew what the chlorella spirulina was. I had to look that up. I had no idea, but Janet knew. She was aware of the health benefits of almost everything that we brought to them. Even the sweeties, the chromium and
vanadium.
I forget. Vanadium. Janet knew exactly what that was and what it was for.
She listens to what's the doctor's name?
Gary Knoll.
Gary Knoll.
Thank
Progressive
you,
Radio Network. And so, yeah.
Gary Knoll. And so when I spoke with Janet, I need to take a sip of something. I spoke with Janet. She told me that they just absolutely love the organic nut butters. And these are her words. She said that John's had the almond and the cashew butter on whole wheat organic bread, and she's tried several of them as well. And she said it was nice and light. It had a different quality to it. And I was like, well, how would you describe this quality? And she said, well, we usually buy Once Again brand. She described it to me as the brand with the raccoon on the raccoons just love peanut butter, and she buys this peanut butter. But she said that CO's nut butters were very superior and not as grainy as the others. They were much more finely ground, and the word she used was silky. She said they were very silky and that she and John were very impressed with them. So they're enjoying them, and yeah, it was good to talk with her and to hear that he'd already gone through the whey protein powder, and that he's well on his way to. I mean, he had an appetite already, but I think he's gaining more of an appetite. When we got there, he asked for a burrito, didn't he?
Do the impression, Kev.
I won't do the impression, but he did ask for a burrito.
Yeah, so he's got a sense of humor. He's got a sense of hunger about him, and
he still has his will.
I'm trying to find
and his mind's there as well.
There you go. Talk for a second, Tony. While I was trying to find these pictures, I had a folder with a couple pictures from our visit that were.
Well, and I mentioned John's publisher, Ingrid, and I don't want to say too much, but I did have a conversation with her, and I let Janet know that I'm very excited about that. John was very enthusiastic about us speaking about the Ultimate History lesson. And so I sent her a package with the Ultimate History lesson and the transcript and everything. So, and CO's letter also, and a couple of other letters. And speaking of letters, the letters to John, which have arrived at Janet and John's place twice now in 2 separate packages, but there's so much mail backed up that they're lost. And so Rich printed them out again the other day, and I'm going to bring them with us next time, and I'm going to read through some of those each time we're there, because he really loves it. I mean,
all right, so I have a couple photos here that I'm going to show. These have already been pre-approved, and Nick, you won't be able to see these, but you'll be able to see it afterwards. Or if you're tuned in the Ustream live right now, you can watch it on your other screen. Hold on a second. Let me switch the screen. All right.
Well, imagine
so what we've got here. Yeah, go ahead. Imagine it. Okay, so while we were there, Kevin fabilists that we gave him last year during the Ultimate History lesson, and it was on the shelf. So Kevin's like, "Oh, let me see if he's read this." And so this is one of the pages that shows that John has read it, because the way he reads is he draws lines, he circles, he has to have a pen to read. So
when you can see that Kevin had already highlighted this page. That's Kevin's yellow highlighting, and that's John's circling.
Right. So he circles names, he underlines passages, and so it's interesting. That's just one of the shots, but I figured this is good to show the proof of life that he is reviewing the things that we had given him. And in the past couple of weeks, he had reviewed more of the things, but this is just one of the shots. So the next photo is this. I think this is a different book, but again, it's just showing John's style. That even though that the stroke is afflicted his left side of his body, the right side of his body is still able to read and write and do all the things he likes to do. And it's just another page. And now, okay, so this is a photo of John, you would think, but really, I lived in New York City, and I said, this means he was a cab driver. So this is his cab driver's license from 1991. Apparently, he was moonlighting while he was teaching at some point, maybe around the time of his retirement. I'm not sure, but that was just priceless. We want to take a picture of that. This is also priceless. John Gatto, Big Apple diplomat. This woman had gotten her purse stolen. He helped to get it back for her, and they gave him some award. And we just thought that was hysterical, so we had to take a picture. That's a great photo of John, and it's good to see what he looked like a couple years ago.
It's the John Taylor Gatto Museum.
Yeah, right.
Really
the apartment really is. All right, so now we got a hallway picture. This is John at Carnegie Hall. If you can see the mouse at home, and let's see, that's me and Kevin after we had been.
That's Lisa trying to get the moon in the background.
I was like, yeah,
trying to be creative.
Get the moon in there. John really enjoyed the Pink Floyd tie dye shirt. I mean, he said several times. I mean, that it reminded him of better days, but he
I like
also
your shirt, man.
Yeah, he kept saying.
He said, "Hey, Pink Floyd."
All right, so this is a picture of
the
library room in John's apartment. This is a panoramic picture, so really it makes it look wider than it really is. But
you're seeing three walls.
There's a lot of books in that room. And then this is a picture of me, and this is John in bed, and you can see he's got this is also a panoramic picture. If that shows up. Yeah, it looks like that shows up on screen, all right?
And in that room, you have artwork from their trips to China. You have the piece that's to the left of, above and to the left of Kevin's head with the horseman. Janet actually painted that.
Okay. So this is a selective photo because it preserves John's dignity. But right here, you can see how thin his legs are right now. And so this is why we're trying to get him the nutrition that he needs. This is a shot of Lisa delivering the box of supplements and CO's nut butters. This is you
can see the perfect food,
the raw food, the One World Way, the tangy tangerine, the sweeties. This is Lisa reading CO's letter. Another action shot. These are, I think, cashews or some other nuts that CO had included in the box.
Peanuts.
Elevator shot. These are some of the supplements when we were bringing them up. There's several trips down to the Jeep, which you have to pay for by the hour on the street. It's a real fun time trying to remember.
50 cents for 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's a real racket. Here are some ultimate history lessons on the shelf. And this one right here with the dust on it now belongs to Nick Ulbrich, who donated $100 specifically just to get a book signed while we were there. So we wanted to help Nick out, and that's part of the reason he's
Can
on
I
the show
just
tonight.
correct
He gets
that,
to see
please?
it before we ship it. Yeah, go ahead.
I donated $100, which is what you've used to buy that book. And then what I said to you is, if you can get me a book signed by John Taylor Gatto, because I can't get that book, which I've tried. And so I said, if you can get a copy of John and get it signed even, and being very cheeky there, asking for that, I will pledge another 100. So given that you've done that, I will fulfill that promise, and I will put another $100 towards the fund.
Would you like to see the proof of life? I have it here, and I could put it under the document cam here. Hold on a second.
Proof of life.
You won't be able to see it until after the show, but I'm going to put it here just so people can see what John wrote to you. Let's see.
Before I get to, awesome.
No, yeah, well, you know. Do you have the stream on?
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, stream is on. I meant Nick.
No, the ads were annoying me too much.
Yeah, when the ads come on, I noticed because I was watching it from Ustream as well. But when the ads come on, they unmute the ads. So I hear you. It's very difficult.
We're still trying to work through all the hurdles and hoops presented by Ustream in order to just have this little.
Ustream's been the most unfortunate application I've ever used in a computer system. Maybe, at least for in the past 2 or 3 years. That it truly does not deliver on a single promise. It has no integrity as far as I'm concerned. And every single version's only presented more problems from what I'm reading on the board. So it is what it is.
Right now, they're listening. Yeah.
I hope they're listening so they fix their
It is what it
system.
is, but we have. That would be great. That would be great because that'd be the best form of technical support. Because their other way of not emailing you back is it's being lost on me. So we have a technical upgrade that allows us to circumvent this crappy Ustream producer software and still broadcast on Ustream. So we'll be working on that in coming weeks. But let me just finish. I think I might have 1 more or 2 more photos left here. All right, so let me go back over here.
It's John and Janet at the farm.
This is John and Janet on the farm. And I thought is this on a farm? Do you know that for sure? I thought it might have been when they were in Montana, when they were mining for gold. Panning for gold.
You could be right.
All right. And that's Lisa in New York. I knew you'd love that. Oh, let me cut to that.
Kevin wanted an action photo in New York.
Kevin had never been in New York, so it was fun being able to take him around because Lisa and I, having recently lived in New York, recently being like 9 or 10 years ago now. Why not? Wow. John lives like 10 blocks from our old apartment on Riverside Drive, and we were able to take him around basically the old neighborhood and show him different aspects of the non-interesting parts of New York City because it's not a tourist area. It's where the people live. It's not downtown. It's not midtown. It's the Upper West Side, and John and Janet have a great apartment there. I think they've had it from the 70s. It's pretty big. As far as New York apartments go, they got a good deal. I think it's rent controlled. And I'd just like to be able to see them stay there. So what we're going to do is continue to go through the other steps in the recovery plan which includes
getting them some additional help. Right now they have a home health aide there that is there Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And she's there for about 5 hours a day. And there's another a friend of John and Janet's who they've known for some years that comes by on Tuesdays and Wednesdays and spends several hours there helping them. And there's a woman who has been their housekeeper, Mildred, for, I don't know, maybe at least 10 years, maybe longer. But she seems to be in and out helping Janet with the groceries. While we were there, she actually brought in groceries. So there was asparagus and kale and all kinds of greens and fresh berries and other fruit and yogurt and things that she'd brought. So there's a lot of fresh and healthy food in the house, and they are getting some help. It's just a matter of getting some additional help on the weekends and also getting John consistent rehab, because right now he doesn't have any physical rehabilitation.
And the supplements are just the first step to help. Sorry, but the supplements are a first
Right.
step just to help him get to the point of rehab, because he's at the point right now where I think his energy level is so low, and he's at such. The amazing thing is, like, I wasn't able to go because I was sick, but when you guys came back and provide some of the recordings you had, like, his will and his mind is there. It's more than there. He really seems like he has a strong will to live, and that's probably the most important thing in this situation. It's the most important thing, and that will allow the food to be assimilated, and that will allow, if possible and potential in the future, once you regain some of the strength, to move forward with rehabilitation, which is sorely needed. And I asked my mom about it, who's a nurse practitioner, and fortunately in the allopathic community today, about it, and she basically said even in his advanced state, if he still has feeling, he can definitely still go through rehabilitation. It's just a matter of getting him to the point where he can start going through that process, which requires supplementation first. So,
Right. And
it
what
was
did he say? Sorry, I'm sorry. What did he say when we told him about the liquid hope? He said, "Do you hear that, body? Do you hear that, body? You're going to get what you need."
Yeah, he looks down at his chest and he's like, "You hear that, buddy? You're gonna get what you need."
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really good to see that his mind was, very much active. He had several books out in front of him, and he was going through and reading them on a regular basis. I believe there was a book. Do you remember the title of the book, Rich? I think it was an
It was
Australian author.
the Imperial Cruise is the book that I had given him during Ultimate History lesson that he had read.
But he mentioned another book that was
okay,
that actually included him.
It's called Better Than College. I don't know if I have a graphic for it. I don't have a graphic for it. It's called Better Than College, and it's done by Blake. Hold on. I have to open Outlook, but we'll find out the name of the author, because Chris Tormey just set up a meeting with Blake, and I had forgotten his name, but I remembered John reading the book. So when Tormey had said he had set up this meeting,
and it does include some of John's research. He's credited and mentioned in the book as well.
I know this is the boring part of the show.
But he had a clipboard out with him, and he was actively working on his latest project. So he's very much looking forward to getting better and being able to still produce books. And he's had a very good conversation back and forth about some of the historical finds that we've all been looking into, and you could just see the excitement in his eyes, just the same way, as he was in the Ultimate History lesson. It was just very, very touching, to see that kind of passion for somebody, that has his own obstacles to overcome at this point. So,
passion and enthusiasm.
He was very happy to see Kevin, because Janet called me afterwards and she asked me all about Kevin. She wanted to know all about Kevin, because John just so enjoyed seeing him again and spending time with him. And she said that he is welcome to come with us anytime we come to New York. So it was nice.
The book that John was reading that he was enamored with when we got there is called Better Than College by a gentleman named Blake Bowles. And I guess he's going to be traveling through somewhere near where Chris Tormey lives, and they're going to have coffee and talk about this. Chris said it's a great short book. It could use some of the things that we learned in logic class and trivium and observation and things like that. So we can actually have him on the show for history. We could interview him about his book, and we could learn a little bit more about, what's going on. John had a copy that was signed to him by Blake Bowles, and so Blake had been not adversely affected by John's work. He had been inspired by it, and he was able to use that inspiration to create his book, and he sent John a copy. So
far, what I've been listening to, I have a couple of reactions, and then I have a couple of questions. The first is to do with the allopathy, and I guess to that, my thinking on it is pick your battleground. I mean, if you know in advance that the doctors are going to do what they want to do, and they view you as a money-making situation, a cow, if you will, then don't fight them on a battleground where they've got the advantage. The second thing would be to test that and ask questions. Don't take the doctors for granted. So they're my two reactions to that. One question that I wanted to ask Tony, you were talking about MCT oil and coconut oil, and what we're seeing at the moment in Australia, I'm not sure whether it's on, or whether Australia is catching on from the US, that's usually the way things work, is coconut water. And that's really starting to take off. So I just wanted to get an idea of is there a relationship to these? Should we be skeptical of coconut water, or should we embrace it?
I love the question, Nick. I'm actually glad you brought it up. When ironically enough, in February of 2012, I actually got sick drinking raw milk. Raw milk I've been drinking for years and years and years, but my raw milk dairy had an outbreak. Like 60 people got sick because it was localized, and they admitted to the problem and what happened and whatnot. So I got Campylobacteriasis, and to make a long story short, it's a bacterial infection of the gut. So I was sick for a week, and I couldn't retain water and at all. That's one of the problems with this, obviously, with severe diarrhea is you lose all your water. So I got to the point where I didn't know how. I thought maybe I had to go to get an IV or something, and essentially my sister's like, drink coconut water. Now, I tried it, and I didn't really believe it at first. It's not very good tasting, if I had to be honest. It's overly sweet, and it has kind of a salty aftertaste. It's not very good, in my opinion. Out of all, like coconut oil, in my opinion, tastes very good, but coconut water, at least for me, didn't. But I now realize why it has that sort of salty, sweet texture. It's because of the electrolytes. I mean, it makes the Gatorade look pitiful. And that's the irony behind coconut water is, in fact, it probably is the greatest single hydrating device we have available to us, except that that isn't perfectly engineered in some laboratory. So as a natural source of rehydration, there is no better source, in my opinion, than coconut water. And so at least for water, I mean, it's not going to provide you with fats or anything, but as far as electrolytes and replenish, it's great for athletes. Like if I was an athlete, a high performance athlete, I'd probably drink coconut water over a Gatorade or some other type of special formalized water. So coconut water really is it's a wonderful hydrator. I drink it when I'm hungover. Well, not that I'm hungover much, but when I do have hangovers, I find it to be a wonderful hydration device. So yeah, overall, it really is good. My sister drinks it kind of religiously, but she works out a lot more than I do. I've kind of tapered off my working out. So, does that answer your question a little bit? It's all naturally occurring electrolytes, and it's a massive amount of them, much more than Gatorade or any sort of power drink. So, and it's all natural. It's natural salts and whatnot. So.
Yeah, that answers my question. Thank you. The other comment I sort of had was you were talking about rather, the approach that you were taking with John, and the reaction that I had to that was that we are never one thing or another. If it's vegan, for example, vegetarian, pescatarian, on the paleo diet, we're never actually that, but we're always inspiring to become that. And so I think that linked in well with what Rich said a little later, which was that we learn and slowly integrate. And in the process of learning and slowly integrating, and this is still related to John, but for the benefit of the rest of us, what is your opinion, Tony, on Alicia Silverstone's Kind Diet?
Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with Alicia Silverstone, but what's what diet? Sorry, what did you say?
It's just the title of her book. She calls it the Kind Diet, but it's basically it's vegan and gluten-free.
I agree with the gluten-free. Jan Irvin actually has done a lot of research on this with this interview with the Wheat Belly author. I can't quite remember right now. My sister recently read his book, and I do very much agree with the opinion on it's not the starch and the grains, it's the gluten. We just cannot process the gluten. Now, granted, I suffered from severe heartburn, just as an anecdotal case. I was 15 years old, and they already had me on a bunch of prescription drugs for heartburn and a whole bunch of other gastrointestinal problems, and I essentially took it into my own hands once I realized what was in these drugs, a lot of heavy metals and all this other junk they were filling with, like Prevacid, for example. And so I went down the Amazon to try ayahuasca and do the whole shamanic thing. I stopped taking it, and I started noticing I was getting a little bit better in the Amazon. And when I came back, it's about the same time I found about the Western price tradition. And I made huge strides in changing my diet and a lot of things we talked about today. But as far as the Kind diet, vegan, I personally believe a vegan and vegetarian diet is actually dangerous to human health. I go with the Western Price Foundation and the evidence that's been presented by them, or through them rather, that the vegan or vegetarian diet, phytonutrients are definitely a huge component of our diet, or something that needs to be considered from a carbohydrate standpoint. There are a lot of these superfoods from plant sources or nut and seed sources, especially if they're sprouted, are extremely nutrient dense and antioxidant dense. That's wonderful. However, without the necessary fats and the proteins, all that just kind of gets passed through the system and not well absorbed. And that's something that needs to be considered. Also with vegan diets, since we're made up of mainly cholesterol and fats and these sorts of things, to just go after a really super high carb diet seems to be antithetical to, at least the argue with the paleo diet is, at least there's some evolutionary evidence, unfortunately. And now if you look at like the Bulletproof executive, he did some actual real bulletproof diet. I forget his name. He's an executive out of Silicon Valley. He spent $250,000 essentially hacking his own biology, hooking him electrodes and whatnot. And he calls it the Paleo 2.0 diet. And essentially, it's just taking the paleo concepts, the idea of what we evolved eating and what works with us best, what assimilates with our bodies best, but what took it to the next level, applying actual science to it, and all these experimentation. And a lot of it is already, like, if you understand the theoretical concept of the nature of the fats, like a lot of it makes sense as towards his dietary recommendations. But I do believe that the vegan diet and a vegetarian diet does not provide enough fats or protein that and are extremely, what we find is extreme deficiencies in vitamin B12, what we get from blood serum of like the red blood inside red meat, for example. So like that's, this is all something that needs to be highly considered. And where I think another thing is to do the general grammar of the vegan vegetarian diet is juxtaposed to diets that are more, now when I say fats and proteins, for example, I met someone down in the Amazon who was actually from the tribe of Sami, and it's an indigenous tribe in Sweden. Norway, and a bunch of other countries. And he ate an all whale diet when he was in Norway, a raw whale diet. And this raw whale is loaded with fat and minerals, a raw whale diet. And like, I find it interesting because there's indigenous cultures that eat tons of bugs filled with protein and nutrients. So it's just a matter of we're getting the right combination of these different, I don't like to say these macronutrient categories of carbs, fats, and proteins. I think that's a little too generalized personally. But overall, if we have to go with that generalization, the cultures have been finding ways to do this consistently throughout time, what works best for their bodies, considering their microclimates and what they can grow and whatnot. And most cultures, especially ones that worked with grain, always seem to ferment the grains, which it changes the whole chemical composition of the grain, makes it much more digestible. The Central American Indians used to ferment their corn, for example, spend 2 weeks doing it. So it's amazing that they even had that sort of understanding of what needs to be done in order for it. And I just imagine, I guess they had to be more in tune with their bodies, just because they didn't have the sort of mechanistic culture we live in today. It was much something more basal and organic, something more felt in the moment.
Well, when you do the research into when grain came into the human diet, as far as northern hemisphere type of civilization, you see tyranny tied right alongside of it. So it seems like we are being fed like cattle. We're not being fed to be healthy individuals. We're being fed to be bred out of our liberty and into servitude. So whether it's Jan, there's a bunch of different interviews that he has, whether it be on the Wheat Belly or the Oiling of America and Sally Fallon, any of these type of topics. It's not the only podcast, but he's the colleague that has done the interviews on this research. We've all learned a lot about ourselves, and then this process of trying to help John has just expedited our interest in learning for ourselves, because now we have somebody in an advanced case of malnutrition. Brain is made up of cholesterol. That you need the right type of fats for your body, otherwise it's going to waste away. And if we have to think about, well, should it be meat, should it be vegetables, I'm going to go with what type of teeth do I have. And when you look at things that only eat vegetables, they have certain type of teeth. When you look at carnivores, they have a certain type of teeth. We are obviously omnivores, and so moderation. Get yourself some healthy protein, get yourself some healthy vegetables. All of the above. It's going to be harder. It's going to be harder and harder going into the future to find good, healthy food. So while you can afford it, get your body nutrified. prepare yourself for whatever's coming. But all we see is a bunch of irrationality building up without too much resistance of intellectual self-defense. So we're doing what we can to become healthy and to become independent of being dependent on the health scare system, because, as we've all seen, allopathic medicine, that's what was treating John for the past year. And his frail state right now is indicative of what they're trying to do. They're not trying to make people stronger and live longer. They're trying to make you sick, and they're trying to profit all the way to your death and then bill your family for whatever you can't pay for. And I just think there has to be a better way. So that's why we've all spent so much time over the past, month and a half researching into health and these various types of needs that all of our bodies, are in need of.
Speaking of health, Isla had asked a question in the chat. She said she'd be interested to hear if John has given up the soda yet, the diet soda.
He had no problem giving it up.
He had no problem at all. Brian McGee had actually sent me an email with some information on aspartame. I was already aware of aspartame, but there was some good information in there. I actually brought information with me, but I didn't even need it, because once I explained to him what aspartame is and what the effects can be on your body and on your brain, he was like done with it. He said he would take it, out of his diet, and we also brought him a replacement for it, thanks to Cody Hall, who brought Zevia to our place in Connecticut when he came to visit a few weeks ago. And I had never heard, well, I guess maybe I had seen Cody with it prior, but Cody's the only person that I've ever seen drink it. I had never seen it in any of the stores around here. But what it is it's sweetened with stevia, which is plant-based, and a natural sweetener. And they have cola and a lot of different flavors, but we just brought him the cola. And he and Janet both tried it while we were there, and they loved it. And so we'll be bringing some more of that when we go as a replacement.
It's a mixture.
Yeah.
It's about getting John to change his habits. It's about getting Janet to amend some of her habits. She's already an organic chef, so she does have experience cooking healthy food, but the situation is just a lot for one person who's 71 and in a walker to handle. And the other people who could be helping out in that situation, I don't think they're helping as much as they could be, as far as people who are on the scene. But people will just get paid for what they get paid for, and they don't take it upon themselves to do whatever's necessary. And that's what we see, and that's what we're going to do over the next couple weeks. And we're going to go in there, and if I have to, help to get things done myself, that's not a problem. And
we've had some people offer to come here and help us, and some people locally to New York offer to help us. So we'll help them get that place organized and
get everything caught up.
Right.
And then the recovery briefings will continue to be more positive as long as nothing unforeseen happens. As far as we know right now, he's internalizing supplements. He's getting stronger. Our last visit helped to visually verify this. His voice verified this. His conversation with Kevin and embracing somebody that he hasn't seen in a year also helps to verify and validate that. So the more visits that we can get in there, I think the better the situation is, and we'll be going back shortly. And I want to thank everyone who has contributed to the chip-in campaign, because when you set up a chip-in, you can set up how long it's going to be and how much you're trying to raise. I don't know how much John needs. I just know he needs more than he has right now. So I really appreciate everybody, despite the fact that there's no goal to be, achieved for the month. You've already overachieved and exceeded my expectations. I was just hoping to raise $500 or $1,000 for him this month, and then I'll put up another chip in next month, and we'll see what we can get. We are approaching $3,000, and John and Janet sure do appreciate it.
We're over 3,000.
I think there'll be a lot more. Oh, is it?
I just, it was
Nick knows.
2,000.
Nick lives in tomorrow. That's how he knows this.
Yeah, I do. So, just to sort of ask about John, I have a bit of a philosophical question, and I'm railroading it a bit here. I know you're midstream, but the question I want to ask is that with the photos that you showed up earlier with the cab driver shot and stuff like that, do you think, in your opinion, that John represents the idea or the notion of a fulfillment of the promise initially made by capitalism that hasn't been or that is being denied by the American oligarchs? And is that one of the main driving reasons why we should get behind supporting John and his work?
That's a really ironic question. Sorry, I got to jump in to say this because I just discussed the same sort of thing with my family at dinner tonight. Was that what's missing is that sort of rugged individualism that was prevalent in obviously the 1800s, what he mentions, the crisis of democracy, well before the crisis of democracy, but then moving forward in the 1900s as well. I mean, it really wasn't seemingly until World War I and World War II, which after World War II especially, they created a completely different culture. That's where we engineered our palettes, engineered everything else to our society perfectly. Cybernetics really went into full swing after World War II because I believe the technology was there. And in John's case, I told my family he's from Western PA, Monongahela, and they're like, oh my God, I know that place. And it's just that sort of old coal mining town like mentality, rugged individualism. Leave me alone. I'm doing my own thing. I'll ask for help when I need it, type of deal. Not that it's always right, but I at the end of the day, it's about the individual first, not the collective. And he really embodies that sort of personality and that sort of what America was supposed to be under the constitutional republic, which are a set of good ideas that became federalized. So I really do think his disposition.
All right, so if I can take a stab at that, Nick.
Yeah.
If I sorry. I have questions about the teachers union. He was a teacher, and he should have some sort of pension or health care or benefits through the teachers union. So we have to check into that. I have to check into his ability to get anything from the VA because he had served in one of the services. So there's various options. I know that their Medicare, their healthcare, HMO plan has not been giving them the fruits of the labor. They've just been collecting for the labor and the fruits. The people that show up for physical therapy aren't really doing physical therapy, and those people have stopped coming months, a couple weeks, at least a month ago, at least.
He has not had any physical therapy since he's been home.
Oh,
and from what Janet told me about his time in the hospital and rehab, there was very little physical therapy going on at all. And in the last rehab, there was no physical therapy. So it's been some time since he's had any physical therapy or rehabilitation.
All right, and we all agree that he just needs, at first, before you can do physical therapy, you have to give the body the nutrients, and his body actually has to be getting stronger, not weaker, in order to carry something like that out. Otherwise, physical therapy is just not going to work out. So we're undertaking those steps. We're also, thinking a couple steps ahead and facilitating him being able to write easier and communicate his notes easier and use Dragon Naturally Speaking. So we have a bunch of different aspects of the multiple steps in progress. Thus far, we've gotten him the nutrients, and so far, so good. So I'd like to move beyond the Gatto briefing part of this episode so we can talk about various topics of research, current events. Nick had sent an email earlier this week, actually earlier this evening, and that was one of the reasons that I wanted him to be on this call, because I think Kevin and Tony can help to address some of the, well, he feels it's a discovery, and there is a discovery there, but I think it needs to be better fleshed out. It is original thinking, so I want to make sure that it is encouraged, because the world needs more original thinkers. So Nick, if you want to, do you have a copy of the email you sent me, and you could do a little read over of it, and then we can comment on it?
Yeah, I can do that. We were talking about the trivium and how important that has been to all of us in the Tragedy and Hope community, and especially the work that you and Tony have done, Rich. Kevin's done some really good work on it. Cody's done some excellent work on it as well, and we will get to Cody's work and the history of it at some point soon, I hope. But in the meantime, it's starting to sink in for me, this idea of grammar, and I guess I'm particularly open to the idea of improving my grammar because in my undergraduate university career, which I know I need a slap on the wrist for, I couldn't use a comma to save my life. So before I even found Tragedy and Hope, I was finding grammar. But one of the things that I'm doing in my current research is discourse analysis, and I won't get too far into that just yet. You can ask me about it if you want to. But one of the ideas is that we come to understand our social environment through social construction, and Vivian Burr has written a really good book on that. Now, you can agree with it or disagree with it, that's all right, but certainly I'm using it for a specific purpose. And I came across a quote in a book by David Lee. The book is called Competing Discourses, Perspectives and Ideology in Language, published by Longman in 1992. And the quote talks of how a phrase such as "daddy kicked the ball" does not express any information about, and I'm quoting now from page 10, does not express any information about the color of daddy's eyes, what kind of clothes he was wearing, how tall he was, whether he kicked the ball, etc., even though all of these features and many more were real properties of the situation. The speaker judges, however, that most of this information is of no interest. The information could, and that's in bold, of course, be encoded if the speaker judged it to be significant, but no matter how much was said, the situation could never be described exhaustively. And that was, in the context of the argument, what he's saying makes sense. But that last sentence, no matter how much was said, the situation could never be described exhaustively, really stuck out to me. And perhaps a synchronicity, because yesterday I was at a seminar, 6-hour seminar, 4-speaker seminar on Hegel, analysing Rebecca Comet's latest book, which deals with the phenomenology of spirit. And one of the things the first speaker spoke about was that things are created out of negativity. And to understand Hegel, you really need to understand Hegel's concept of negativity. So I guess my question is, to wrap it up, and I know I've taken a while here, but it's to understand this notion that the present is always negatively creating the past. So it's always destroying the past. And the only way that we can develop a causal relationship between the past and the present is through someone. So it's either Rich's causal relation, Lisa's, Tony's, mine. It's our causal relation. We own it. There is no objective causal relation. And I'm just wondering if the group agrees with that logic.
Yeah, I think what you're describing there can be further researched in the concept of organic unity. And I'm working on a presentation on the classical trivium and the organic unity of the polis. And when you really get into the etymology of where the idea leading into the Middle Ages of the trivium is created, it's based on an earlier philosophy of the enkyklios paideia. And you find that the whole establishing of this educational system within Hellenistic Greece, later Greece under Isocrates, you find that this was based on trying to formulate the unity of the political parties within this atmosphere. So it was all about bringing people together in order to educate them on a common tract so the community could be enlarged and universalized. So I think what you're describing there, kind of in a microcosmic, conversational, or connective level of the dialogue that it creates, or the central unifying force of being able to discuss these things and have those relationships, is correlative to the creation of the liberal arts education itself.
All of what Kevin said, I couldn't agree more. It's sticking only specific to the details of what you've presented. First of all, saying "Daddy kicked the ball," I don't quite understand how that presents absolutely no information whatsoever. Unless are they talking about contextual? I don't. This delay really is.
Sure. Yeah. All right, so we select. Okay, that's all right. There's a delay with Tony. There's a delay with Nick. I apologize to those of you watching this at home because. Yeah, it's Casual Cafe. All right, so anyway, the issue is that there's a sentence, and the sentence describes something that happened, and you cannot encapsulate the totality of that reality in words, and so there's always entropy. If I take a snapshot,
hold on, I have to say something to that, because that makes me upset. Because what's the difference between Immanuel Kant? I mean, it's no different between the noumenal and the phenomenal worlds. I mean, it's no different then. I mean, essentially, you're just splitting up. We can never be the things in themselves. We can only describe the things in themselves using these axiomatic conclusions of logic. Like, I just don't see, because that's it sounds a very skeptical position to take with language, saying you can never perfectly describe the full moment because you can't be the moment. You can only describe what you're observing. So yeah, I guess it goes to the observer status, and that's why judgment and logic is so important.
The key to it is language.
All right. The key is it doesn't take anything away from reality. The totality of reality still happened. Just because we don't have the need to communicate that. We communicate based on our needs. So if there's something relative and relevant to the situation, I can include it in the sentence. If I said that Daddy kicked the ball with a pointy shoe, then you know that the ball probably blew up and didn't kick very far. Right? Like if he had a spike on the front of his shoe. So if I add these words to the sentence, it changes the idea. And it's just a description of the past. It's not the past itself. So all these ideas do not affect reality. They are abstractions. And why do we have abstractions? Because we have to communicate in this way in order to get along and survive. Right? So you have to be careful. These abstractions, these subjective ideas about an objective situation are not indicative of the objective situation. Just because they change history in the words does not change the actual totality of the reality that happened and the cause and effect that brought us here. So it's all about being able to navigate these minefields, because what Lee comes up with, what you quoted, Nick, I would say, duh, yeah, that's obvious. That's going on. But what's the relevance and what's the context of the argument? Is he saying that cause and effect doesn't happen? I have this here to do a demonstration. There's gravity, there's friction, there's viscosity, there's all these things going on. So this is my argument, Kant. I'm just saying that polite in case there's kids at home, because his name's pronounced Kant, and it's Hegel. I checked with someone in the audience, Nick. They live in Germany. They speak German. They say it's Hegel, and they also
I actually spoke to a German yesterday.
You'll hear the pronunciations.
Who was presenting on Hegel and said the exact same thing. So I apologize for any confusion I caused, but I was right about his first name. Gorg.
I wasn't chastising you. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't confusing anyone at home. I don't want to confuse anybody. I'm just we're all still learning. So
Nick, that's a really good
entropy,
question.
What you're talking about is similar.
Sorry,
I'm so sorry.
Nick, that's a really good question.
I'm thinking that something's. I don't even know what to do now.
All right, Tony, you're gonna have to let Lisa talk, and then you can reply to Nick because the delay.
I'm sorry. I've been sick all week, and I was just actually making chicken.
I'm sorry, I can't hear the delay. It's like all everything's all backwards.
But I understand. So exactly. So what I was saying is, with regard to the entropy, I think what Rich was trying to say is, like, for example, when I text message in the chat and we're talking, there's all of this context, this metadata that is not available. So there's entropy in the message, right? Is that sort of what you're...
Something's being lost. Are you not getting total communication?
No, they're saying there's no entropy ever happened. Like, because they're saying no cause and effect happened. Like, their cause and effect is assumed in the language. That's what they're saying. Like the negative force in Hegel's philosophy, which is the antithesis, everything is contained within a closed system of entropy where there's a certain chaos always associated, where there's no causal determination why certain events happen. It just manifests to this one sort of conclusion. So through language, you can, I guess, manipulate that conclusion, I guess. But they're saying you can never really describe your totality or the reality in totality, which then leaves this gap open for whether or not a cause and effect has any sort of legitimate existence, or if we're just making it a legitimate existence through our descriptions.
Through descriptions or through language.
Cause and effect in action. It goes on. If you turn it over, it does the same thing. It goes in the other direction. It's grabbing. And so people who want to use words to try to argue that away do simple, but reality is available. You can look at it. I can put this under the document cam. You can see how gravity works. I don't think anyone watching this video is really contesting that, but that's Nick dealing in the university structure where there's solipsists, where the objective view of reality is just as equal as the subjective view. We're about to do a whole podcast on this and bring in Umpleby for DVD 4 of cybernetics, because he'll show you that, oh, these two moral systems of plunder and production are exactly equal, and there's no difference, and they're both logical. And so when you get away from reality and use words to abstract and abstract and abstract, they can build anything. And so the key is stick to reality, stick to that which exists, stick to the cause and effect that is part of the existence, and everything will work out fine. Now, Tony, you had a
just
question
to
for Nick.
defend my. Okay, so I'm going to go. What I was going to say is just to defend my university to some extent. Not that I need to, but also just to clarify maybe our terms a little bit. What I'm talking about with this issue that I've brought up isn't necessarily the absolute of whether something exists or whether it doesn't, and whether Hegel and Kant are solipsists or not, words I can't pronounce. But whether because I wrote in the email to Rich, I wrote that we are at risk here of talking across terms, and this is something that we have to be careful not to do. So one of the things that I want to make clear is that my bringing this point up is not to do with what Lee has argued. I'm extrapolating from Lee, and I'm extrapolating on the basis of yesterday I was at a symposium on Hegel. So one of the things I'm wanting to also add to this now, the insight that I was given from my university supervisors was that at some point knowledge becomes so opaque or so specialized that it's unnecessary. Like, for example, if you think about a statue, when it's still in a cement block format, then it's anything, and everyone can look at it and come up with their own version of that statue. But once we apply language to really stretch this metaphor out and chip away at the stone, it becomes one thing, and that is what I understand from yesterday in terms of Hegel's negativity. So that by our negativity, we produce only one possibility instead of producing a number of possibilities. And that struck me with that last sentence, that we can never exhaustively describe a situation. So that is sort of what I wanted to clear up. Tony, I'll throw it back to the group.
It's an either or fallacy. One of the things I'm really finding with the trivium, and this is something Gene, who presented the trivium to us, told us was going to be a major issue. And this is what makes the trivium so personal. Judgment. Judgment is essentially taking a state of chaotic factors and making a judgment call based on how much information is available to you and how much logic, induction, deduction, generalizations you've come to. And at some point, you just have to say, this is what it is in order to communicate. Whether or not it is really that thing at that time, that's why we call it a general theory of something in science. With all the amalgamation of facts and data we have, this is what something is for now until more information is presented. And I kind of go along with that rather than saying just because we can present something, if I get this right, it seems to present an either or sort of situation. If it's not this, it has to be essentially this. Or if, and maybe I got this backwards, but if you're saying, for example, if we're looking at a statue and we don't apply language to it, it is just what we see. There's no description. When we apply language to it, the description essentially, I don't know if you said this makes it, I would imagine it makes a multiplicity of ideas and ways of describing essentially the same generalized qualities that everyone seems to, be pointing to the same thing.
So I still don't see the point of, because you don't describe something in its totality through words, what is the point? Like, does that guy who makes that argument not have to, use words and ask for change and do the things that he needs to do to get through his day? So these arguments, the argument that you can take logic too far and that you can have knowledge, so-called knowledge, and it becomes meaningless and vague and opaque. Yes, those are indications that you've gotten away from reality, that which exists, observing that which exists, describing it through your percepts and your concepts, eventually through language and action. And so that's all it's about. Observation,
that's
identification, removal of contradictions, and that's organization, and then eventually communication. Go ahead, Tony.
The law, sorry, it just popped in my head. The whole logic going too far. I don't know. Kevin had a book I was reading while I was in Connecticut, and I really can't remember. Maybe it was all something my allness. I forget. Anyways,
Help him out,
went
Kev.
over. It went over the whole concept of. I literally just lost my whole train of thought trying to remember that book.
Well, can I jump in then?
Jump
Yep.
in, Kev. Oh, go ahead, Nick. Let's go to Nick.
I guess everything we've discussed so far is, in a sense, really confusing, and this is a really confusing topic, and I'm not wanting to confuse anyone, and I'm not wanting to argue one side or the other. And I just emailed Rich this morning my time, and said to him, "Look, I apologize in advance, but I have to talk to someone about this," and here we are now. However, what I'm wanting to know now, and if I can be succinct in my question, is if in describing the reality as a situation that can never be described exhaustively, if that is correct, then is that what Kant and Hegel and etc. are talking about when they say, quote unquote, there is no reality? Are they talking about the fact that it could be anything because anyone can describe it? And so then that just invalidates everything they say, because we can agree on certain things. Like you and I might see the color orange differently. For example, you might see the color orange how I see the color blue, but we consistently say that one stimulus is one thing. So, and we agree upon that. And it's Aristotle's brilliance of A equals A. And so I think in my work, I want to use what David Harriman and Leonard Peikoff and others have done to dismiss Kant and Hegel, but not dismiss everything that they've done, because I still think 200 years after Hume sat in a room and said that the person just appeared before I saw them, it must have some relevance, because any crazy person, i.e. me, can say stuff like that, and in 200 years it won't be the case. So I'll throw it back to the group. Thank you.
Yeah, Nick, you're on point. In fact, I have a question for you, Nick, before I lose my train of thought. Well, first of all, yes, you are correct, because we can't describe our reality exhaustively. And logic was the only system ever used to analyze reality, since it was codified by Aristotle, but definitely much earlier in other cultures and under other terms and names and whatnot. But, in Western culture, it's formally understood through Aristotle. In the 18th century, especially in the 18th century, during the German idealist movement, that's when logic turned against itself, and it became skeptical against its own, ability to compare and contrast and, make a judgment call on what something is. And once it started doing that, a lot of different philosophies popped up. Berkeley explained away matter and for mind, or Hume explained away mind for matter, or actually kind of both, to be honest. And Kant then came along with the justification, since nothing exists at all, we can split the world up into these two different categories: the things in themselves, which that we can never know, and then the things we can use our logic to describe in these sort of axiomatic categories. And it's really in the 18th century German idealist movement which we see logic, ironically enough, taking two turns. One is turning against itself, but two, it's also essentially somehow justifying using the will to create systems that can be carried out through these like perfectly logical considerations. So actually, the Corbett report did a pretty good show concerning the limitations of logic. Really, he gets into symbolic logic, and that becomes so difficult to try to hash out, because symbolic logic is 100% different from Aristotelian logic. It is really an antithetical version of logic, and that's the logic that people associate. I actually was just talking to my sister about this before we got on the call, and she's like, I think most people are associating logic with symbolic logic. And, for lack of a better word, she seems to be right. And symbolic logic takes a skeptic, nominalist sort of point of view, where we just use logic to create the parameters, to create the system we need for our greater good, whatever that might be, whatever we want to accomplish. And the Aristotelian logic really is about just empowering the individual to use observation and just try to get on a common ground sort of communication mechanism. So that's those are the two differences I see. As far as just using, you can never describe anything exhaustively, and that essentially explains away our ability to know anything. Yeah, that does relate then again back to the nominalist perspective, where each individual discrete particle in existence or individual unit in existence, each is categories that we come up with, such as like a tree. These things don't apply because each tree has a specific difference. William of Ockham is usually accredited with this sort of thing. And so, yeah, the nominalist, the skeptical perspective, Hume's solipsistic analyses, these all lead to, ironically enough, and this is something I should probably be considered, but a certain justification for the right of logic, using. Now that we split the world up into things we can't know, all we can know is this perfect, like Kant did this with his noumenal and phenomenal worlds. Once he split the world up, what we can know is what we can control only through logic, which he created the categories for logic, very much akin to these triadic structures we see in Hegel and I don't think it's Francis Bacon's work. Have you run into any not problems or any arguments from like a philosophy of language perspective in your university? I've noticed the biggest pushback I get from the trivium, and the trivium itself, the history, there is no real good history about it, but the way it's been presented to us is really just an Aristotelian logical perspective, which is, it's kind of impossible to argue with because it's the natural processes of the mind, but it also does present this sort of like, what is the trivium and how it's been presented to us type of thing, like what's going on there. That's a whole different topic. But my question is, have you come up against like any philosophers of language, anyone that's expounding, for example, Noam Chomsky and his universal grammar, or any resistance? Because I know lately I've come up against a lot of solipsists and skeptics that, quite frankly, I don't feel at the time to really deal with, but nonetheless they present interesting conclusions as far as what the mind can do before we experience anything in a priori propositions, for example, or a priori. So that's, I was just wondering if you had any conversations or had come across anything about what concerning the philosophy of language juxtaposed to that of the trivium, for example, or just logical thinking.
Okay, well, the delay might mean that I'm over talking someone at the moment. I hope that I'm not, and I'm going to continue. So if you're not talking, no one is. Good. Okay, so if I understand your question correctly, Tony, then what you're asking me is if I have had any issues with doing my work and trying to use the trivium within my work, and the short answer is no. Initially, when I was doing just broad brushstroke research, I did have a lot of quotes from, and her name has slipped my mind, Dorothy Sayers, a lot of Dorothy Sayers quotes, and my supervisors who are definitely not on the same page as Rich in some respects, and I'm very, very fortunate that, Richard, you've taken some time to help me and to mentor me, and I'm forever grateful for that. And even though it seems at times that they're antithetical, they're not at all, but they just want to make sure that, given that it's an institution that has structures, that I don't rock the boat beyond a point that's worth anything. So they're always reminding me of the opportunity cost benefit. And basically what we did with the trivium information and with this grammar logic rhetoric structure is just use it, and not to point out to people what we're doing. Just do it. And if people are smart enough to pick up on it and critique it, then good for them. And I'm going to help out the delay again by saying that I will not be talking from now.
Yeah, Nick, I think you made some good points there in regard to, not necessarily lumping in all the ideological or all of the historical perspectives that any of these individuals present. I think, in fact, when you're talking about Hegel, in dealing with the positive and negative aspects, you'll find that he's taking that from a guy by the name of Jakob Boehme, who was one of the first, he calls him the first German philosopher. Now, as far as the raised, and what I would need to hear a little bit more of your perspective on that, but I think what it is raising is kind of the organicist method of looking at this, because you have people that will put 12 people in a room and put an object in the middle of the room and ask each person to describe it, and you're going to get a different description based on the perspective that the observer is sitting in. So when you start thinking about those kinds of techniques and topics, you really find that to be the basis of cybernetic reasoning. So if you have any comment on that, I'll pass it back to you.
The comment that I have on that is that cybernetics, from what I understand, it has its limitations, definitely, but its big advantage is that it demonstrates the way that small changes which don't seem like they're going to have a causal effect, for example, putting a chocolate bar at the front of the counter and then selling DVDs at the back of the store half price, have on the system as a whole. So I think that it's really important to have at least some literacy in cybernetics, but at this stage I don't have enough of that myself to comment one way or the other, so I'll hand it back.
That's interesting, Kevin. Just to interject real quickly, that you mentioned that, because I really want to get to the philosophical grounding as to where they're, because essentially what they're saying is everyone's is describing the same object differently. But I mean, you could actually deduce certain qualities that I think you could essentially say there would be no difference. I guess that gets into a whole language battle, though, when you look at that logic/language battle. Because no, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I think you make a great point there. It's not going to change the object that is actually in existence, but what they're doing is they're resting on this, off the wall equation of basing it on each individual observer. While they don't prescribe that kind of individuality to any of us on any other level, they're using this as a way to kind of skirt the issue, skirt logic, use kind of the mathematical formulation as a way to, and it's being done as a way to bring about consensus, but not in the way that maybe Socrates would have brought about consensus. It's done in a way that nullifies each individual's individual interpretation by screaming ambiguity, screaming that it's an ambiguous situation. So it really comes down to the observer in that, and it's the same way with language, because what you find with language is that that's a unifying force, whether it's in small situations or not. So if we're not communicating, there's an obvious difference in the communication, not necessarily the object in discussion.
For instance, under the desktop cam here, this is from Norbert Wiener's Cybernetics. This is subjective logic. This is the imaginary logic that they made up. You see all these equations? You see how it's not English language? This is the logic by which they are driving eugenics and population control and all these other things. Cybernetics is how they control human resources or steer people from being an individual into the collective. And then they write these equations to predict people's behavior. There's another page of it here, you see. So you can see that you're not supposed to read this book called Cybernetics or Control and Communication of the Animal and the Machine by Norbert Wiener. You're not supposed to read this book. That is not Aristotelian logic. That is not the type of logic when we're talking about logic. That is the antithesis, the opposite of what we're talking about. What they created in that subjective, this symbolic logic is a control system, and it's all about crowd control, and it's just the latest and greatest flavor, and they speak in this language of symbols that only a few people like Norbert Wiener and Bertie Burt Russell, here he is. Principles not of social construction. It's about how to reconstruct society. And so that's just one of the many books that we are here researching this week. But, beware of these people because they exist, they're organized, they have lots of office supplies, and they're a little further ahead on the learning curve, although we are catching up to them pretty darn quick. Now, Kevin, did you have some commentary that I cut you off on?
No, not necessarily. I think I got most of the main points out there. Just really trying to portray, how this they kind of they teeter-tot back and forth on logical reasoning and whatever works, because when it comes down to
the selective pragmatism, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you look into the ideology that is used to formulate the Macy conferences and the cybernetic conferences that they use, you'll find a lot of interesting characters within the literary criticism movement and within literary culture from Cambridge and Harvard University who are advocating the reapplication of the Middle Age version of the Trivium, which is the tribute to Isocrates, where you have this constant goal, which is to reunite the polis, not necessarily to educate people within their own right. It's to make great citizens or make the elite class. So you can really trace these patterns throughout history and see how they're able to manipulate this moving forward.
Go ahead, Tony.
It's a tool for creating culture or instilling culture in certain groups or castes within that structure or civilization. If I remember correctly, I think Hegel got his idealization of the Greeks from Friedrich Holderlin. I believe it was Holderlin, and who I believe was a genius for his time, at least being able to translate Greek and all that stuff. So a lot of the different philosophers and whatnot. He was, and ironically enough, in the 20th century, that's when his brilliance was realized, because his translations actually ended up being mostly, I guess, correct. So he got a lot. This whole idealization, Hegel's a really tough character to tackle, because I feel like the thesis, antithesis, synthesis is improperly presented, because he presents it in the context of both metaphysics and epistemology, which are kind of very abstract topics to deal with. And then he tries to equate it to this movement towards a greater whole. But he describes this whole as pure transcendence. And like pure becoming pure, the thing in itself in totality. And so he sees everything as like a refractal reflection as part of this greater whole. But I think he's thinking about it more in a metaphorical sort of abstract conception, spiritualized conception, if you will. I know he was pretty spiritual, and a lot of the people at the time he was following had their own sort of esoteric spiritual beliefs as well. So now the problem was, when the German state was codified later in his life, he essentially saw that pattern as movement towards the whole as the code of, in the idealization of the Prussian or the German state at that time, after Otto von Bismarck,
if I can just cut in.
No, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Just on the point you're talking about religion, from yesterday's symposium, the whole thing is about, obviously, and this is something that we find hard, I think, to understand today, because we're much more secular. But even when you get back to like some of the discoveries that Galileo made, they were made, the genesis of his thought was from within a church, a chandelier swinging, or the priest using incense pendulums or something like that. Well, same thing with Hegel, and the difference being that the Napoleonic Wars were just ending, and I think when he finished writing, there was another war that was just starting. So this is really the fertile ground that nihilism was born from, and Hegel's big thing is the difference between mourning and melancholia, which is why I think the speakers yesterday were so eloquent when they were reading Freud and Hegel together. So Hegel through Freud and Freud through Hegel. And it's about whether Germany was able to mourn the death of Christ, or whether they were melancholic about the death of Christ. And I think Hegel was saying, because they had Luther and their own sort of way of doing it, that they were able to mourn the death of Christ, whether France was melancholic about the death of Christ because they didn't have Luther, and so instead they had the terror. But by the end of the terror, the guillotine had turned in and on itself, and that's negativity self-destructing. So I absolutely agree with you that it's a really, really complex ground for philosophy, and so is Kant, and so is all these people. And I guess the thing is, I guess Brett did a really great job in his series on the American school system, but he sort of simplified these characters too much, I feel.
And that's not really taken away from Brett's work too much, insofar as a lot of Brett's work is trying to present to a very an audience that has no allusions to this sort of historical context. So he did a wonderful job with his American Way series, and I mean so many of his podcasts. But I do agree. When Rich and I and Brett, we did that podcast on Hegel, that's where I started to really get in a little bit more in depth of what was going on with Hegel, and realize that even Kant, if I really had to be completely honest, Kant said some brilliant brilliant things. And quite honestly, I can't disagree with a lot of his conclusions. At the end of the day, though, you live in a world of existence and cause and effect, and I just don't see how that can ever really truly be explained away. Kant just did he just kind of made some very interesting observations that were then used as later justifications for why things need to be done. And it contradicts a little bit, because I know Hegel tried to resurrect, he took so much of Kant's philosophy at that time and tried to create this perfect metaphysics. And what ended up happening is, much like you said, negativity turned in on itself. And by the end of his whole philosophical journey, you have things like pragmatism, positivism, nihilism. I mean, it's completely, philosophy and rationality had literally completely destroyed itself. And by the end, he thought he had perfectly described the absolute, and that he'd given his whole life was going, his whole life's goal was trying to describe this absolute, this all-knowing, all-pervasive force, or whatever it is that connects everything in the universe. And ultimately, he ended up just leaving it open for any number of interpretations by any number of philosophical schools. Positivism just sought to just get rid of metaphysics altogether, and nihilism is just that this completely takes the floor out from philosophy altogether. And pragmatism is really about the will and power, and as justifying a means to an end. So you get all these different philosophies that are really just a might makes right, and that's why I find so interesting about the German idealist movement. Going back to your whole thing on religion, that's so true, and that's something I'm still trying to tackle. And Will Durant, in his Story of Philosophy on the Immanuel Kant section, the whole skeptical philosophy, does a brilliant job at really hashing out how much religion played such an important role in everyone's life, and how much philosophers at the time really used it as a justification for, creating their philosophies at that time. And Hegel, he's not left out of that conclusion. Same with Kant. They're very much Protestants, very much influenced by the times. Go ahead.
Before the world, and everything was subordinated to. No, you're right on that. I mean, everything was subordinated to the dictates of the church, and to what was put forth by Christianity at the time. They would use these canonical texts as the guide on how you should try to mimic for ways of speaking. So, I mean, that same philosophy is, what has carried on over time.
Kevin, have you read The Seven Liberal Arts, A Study in Medieval Culture, and then in square brackets 1906 by Paul Abelson? Because I think he really does a good job of an exegesis on what you and Tony have just said, which is demonstrating how people bastardize the trivium basically in the same way that people have bastardized constructionism or constructivism today in the education system, like basically using the power of pedagogy but giving it the name of something else. Back to you.
Are you talking about Jesus' ex-wife? You talked about an ex of Jesus or something like that? Is that what you said? No, seriously. Here, I'll cut back to Kevin. You can hear the story.
Yeah, I have. I've read quite a bit of Paul Abelson. In fact, there are three educational philosophers in the United States you will find that a lot of their work has been outdated by people that have discovered the true educational tradition. But Paul Abelson, Thomas Davidson, who's the founder of the Fellowship of the New Life that goes on to be the Fabian Society, he wrote a dialogue on Aristotle in which he attributes the trivium wrongly to the wrong tradition, essentially, because the trivium comes out of the Socratean tradition, whereas it's more based on the oratorical and rhetorical expression subordinated to the will of the state or to the unity of the state. It was they realized that they had piranha states on the Mediterranean, and they had the Persian Empire to worry about. So this was a major factor in Isocrates crafting that very pedagogy that you mentioned. So this pedagogy is created as a way to constantly present the unification of the polis. So the polis has to be constantly educated based on whatever state philosophy is in existence. So Isocrates himself said he didn't care if it was a democracy, an oligarchy, or whatnot. I mean, as long as the control of the pedagogy would place the alleged power within the people in the polis, they felt this would be a significant check to maintain the status quo. So what it really gets into is they're using the liberal arts as techne or technology. And so, I'm familiar with Paul Abelson's work. I also recommend looking into Elwood P. Cubberley, who I wouldn't have heard about without John Taylor Gatto. He wrote a history of education, which covers the trivium, as well as Thomas Davidson's work. But you'll find in a lot of the more recent scholarship, such as Bruce Kimball's Orators and Philosophy, Orators and Philosophers, as well as the Liberal Arts by Wagner, you'll find that the tradition is more recently aligning based on the historical evidence underneath Isocrates. So the traditions of Aristotle, traditions of Socrates, and of Plato are still, while they are searching for true knowledge, you'll find that they are also creating eugenics programs within the Plato's Republic, where they're going to keep people in caste based on metallurgy and all these different things. So when you look at the motivations prior to the allegations of searching for truth, you'll see that they have this constant reaffirmation of maintaining the city-states or maintaining what they call a community of learning. So when you step outside, access to all those same scholars in an open sense, you can go through there and read any of these. But when it gets put into a compendium where you have these canonical works, it's subordinating to the ideology that they wish to impose.
I have a quote from the Coverley book, if I could just, if I can hold it here. I can't show it under the document cam and read from it at the same time, but this is from page 27 of Elwood P. Coverley's An Introduction to the Study of Education, which is among the Riverside Teachers Textbooks. So this is a textbook for teachers. This is page 27 on Our Educational Problem. Compared with a highly organized and centralized nation such as Germany. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's find out when this book was written before we go talking about history. It is from the year 1925. So what they're going to say about Germany will be preempted by a war in a couple years. So, take note. Compared with a highly organized and centralized nation such as Germany, France, Italy, or Japan, which is ironic because we were at war with half those countries a couple years, we seem feeble in our ability to organize and push forward a constructive program for national development. Many of the methods which they have used so effectively are entirely lacking with us. The state is highly organized. Their people are homogeneous and like-minded. The ruling class is well-educated, selected by careful education and service tests. National policies are well thought out and promulgated. The schools are part of the national organization, effectively planned for the advancement of national interests. The teachers have been carefully trained in the state institutions and then organized into a form of a national army for national ends. The instruction in religion or national morality, I guess those are equivalent, is directed toward definite civic ends, and national military service is used as an effective force for nationalizing all elements and for training the people in obedience and in respect for the law and order of authority. End quote. Now, that brings me to this next book. I can put this under the document cam. It is called The Principles of Social Reconstruction by the infamous Bertie Bert Russell of Oxford University. Also, one of those guys who likes to use symbolic logic, right, Kev? I mean, Bertie Bert. All right, so there is a quote in here, and let me cut back to myself while I find it. It should be right here, marked with one of these pages.
I care not who makes the law,
reads, rather.
just who makes the pedagogy.
It talks about another, again, this is Principles of Social Reconstruction. This is from the year 1916. He's talking about eugenics clearly on page 129. He's already disproved Malthus earlier on, which I thought was interesting. He talks about the moral equivalent of war, and he keeps repeating this phrase over and over again in this 1916 book. World government. I've never heard of such a phrase before, but he keeps repeating it. But here on page 129, he says, if the birth rate were very much increased, the eugenic conditions extracted might be made more strict. So the eugenic conditions. I have no idea what he's even talking about there, eugenic conditions. But I also want to quote from page 163 where he's talking about education. Education is usually treated as a means of prolonging the status quo by instilling prejudices, rather than creating free thought and noble outlook by the example of generous feeling and the stimulus of mental adventure. In marriage, love, which is creative, I guess maybe in marriage and love, but this is, I'm reading it how it reads. In marriage, love, which is creative, is kept by chains of jealousy, which is possessive. Religion, which should be set free, the creative vision of spirit, is usually more concerned to repress the life of instinct and to combat the subversiveness of thought. In all these ways, the fear that grows out of the precarious possession has replaced the hope inspired by the creative force. The wish to plunder others is recognized, in theory, to be bad, but the fear of being plundered is little better. Yet these two motives between them dominate 9/10 of politics and private life. Now, I think he's foreshadowing the next Peace Revolution episode where we talk about Umpleby, who's a professor of cybernetics trained by Heinz von Forster. It's very interesting. It's a lot of work. We have not yet completed it yet, but it's been several weeks in the making, and in comparison to the last 3 Peace Revolution episodes, I think you're going to like it. Even if you like those, especially if you like those, it's going to be wonderful. So, Kevin's been biting his tongue here for a couple minutes because he's got so much to say on what I just read, and then we'll have to cut back to Nick and then to Tony, and then maybe we'll wrap it up. But here we go.
What I'd like to add is also from a Elwood P. Cubberley book. It's called The History of Education. On page 558, it gives a little bit of background on some things we've all learned from John Taylor Gatto in relation to the Prussian education system and how this was adopted. The organizing work of Frederick the Great. In 1740, Frederick II, surnamed the Great, succeeded his father, and in turn guided the destinies of Prussia for 46 years. His benevolently despotic rule has been described on a preceding page. Here we will consider only his work on education. In 1740 and 1741, and again in 1743, he issued regulations concerning the support of schools in the villages of Prussia, in which he directed the new schools should be established, teachers provided for them, and that existing school regulations and arrangements made in pursuance thereto may be permanent, and that no change shall be made in any pretext whatever. In 1750, he effected a centralization of all provincial church consistories except the Catholic Silesia under the Berlin Consistory. This was a centralizing measure of large future importance, as it centralized the administration of the schools as well as that of the churches in the transformation of the Berlin Consistory into an important administrative agent in the central government. To this new centralized administrative organization, the king ensued instructions to pay special attention to the schools in order that they may be furnished with able schoolmasters and the young become well educated. Now, he is credited with the evolution of the modern gymnasium. Now, if you... What does that mean? The gymnasium is what was created by Philip Melanchthon. Melanchthon is considered to be one of the first theologians.
But you're not talking about gym class. You're talking about a type of school.
Sure, we're talking about the schools named gymnasiums. This is a concept that was introduced by Philip Melanchthon, who wrote many books on the trivium and is credited with bringing the trivium into German education even prior to Frederick the Great. He lived from 1497 to 1560. They call him the preceptor of Protestant Germany because he created these gymnasiums, and he was a collaborator of Martin Luther on the Protestant Reformation. So I have another book by James Russell, who was the dean of Columbia Teachers College, and he was also the teacher of Alexander Inglis and Elwood P. Cubberley. So if you look into James E. Russell, he wrote a book called German Higher Schools. And I don't have it in front of me right now, but I found this about 6 or 7 months ago, where he talks about how the trivium was being used in German schooling. So it's interesting to see the trivium with the Prussian compulsory schooling overlay, and you then begin to understand how the grammar, logic, and rhetoric within the pedagogical sense gets extended across age ranges.
All right, so if I might clarify some of those words, when he's referring to Isocrates and the use of the trivium in compulsory schooling coming all the way up through the ages, What we're really talking about is like any other tool. If you learn to use it for yourself, then it's not mind control. It's you learning how to learn anything for yourself. It's the essence of experience here on the planet. If you don't learn how to use your mind, somebody else is, and they're going to apply the trivium in their way, in the sophisticated way where, you know, objective reality doesn't matter because the truth is what they make it up to be. This is Gatto referring back again to Charles Sanders Peirce, to Alexander Inglis, to not Bertrand Russell, James, I think so little of him. I can't remember his name. William James. There you go.
Right.
I do remember him, but I don't think much about him. Yeah. So these ideas that Gatto spouts through the Ultimate History Lesson, when you take them apart and dissect them, they're amazingly dense. They're almost fractal, because what we've learned on Elwood P. Cubberley or any of these other characters that he mentioned that I was vaguely familiar with, I thought I kind of knew the angle. But you have to get the books, or at least somebody did, and we got some of these first editions, and we want to check this out because we didn't want it just to be John's words. We want to also likewise couple that with our own innate understanding of what's going on.
And what I'd like to throw on top of that in regard to Frederick the Great, he is also the person who signs the constitutions for the higher degrees of Scottish Rite Freemasonry. On May 1st, 1786, which is the 10-year anniversary of the Bavarian Illuminati, Frederick the Great, in a frail condition, completes the higher degrees of Scottish Rite Freemasonry. So you see a connection between education and Freemasonry all throughout time. If you learn about the degrees that are associated with Freemasonry, you'll find that the trivium and quadrivium are part of the second degree of the York Rite. So they're providing this artificial unity of the 7 liberal arts as if there could be no higher art or no further art beyond that. And when you learn that through time, the trivium and the quadrivium and the liberal arts system at one time had 9 arts, or at one time had 10, and you understand how these were actual arts that were being displayed in public that people like Isocrates and Protagoras would then couple into an education system in order to manipulate the polis, because they saw that as the way to maintain social and political unity and harmony when they had city-states even growing in the same ideology gets adopted within the Roman tradition, and they spread this unity as a way to maintain city-states. The educational system has been very profitable, and as I said, Philip Melanchthon, who introduced this into Germany, was a major fan of Quintilian, and Quintilian is responsible for solidifying the humanistic version of the liberal arts system, and he's doing this as a avid follower of Isocrates as well. It's the rhetorical versus the philosophical, except you find that the philosophical also had their own hang-ups within trying to maintain unity. It wasn't as if Aristotle was running out trying to stop slavery, and it wasn't as if Plato wasn't advocating the sterilization and the removal of children from unfit parents.
Yeah, I don't think you can include all those in the same sentence, because Aristotle's views are very different than Plato's. Aristotle did advocate slavery, and I fault him for that. He's a human being. He's kind of messed up in that angle. So otherwise, you can take the rest of his work and discount the messenger.
If I could provide a little bit of context.
The differences between Isocrates. You can see the differences between Isocrates and the sophists, and how they are willing to use language to bend reality in an illusory subjective sense. And you can always come back to the objective sense of reality by examining through your 5 senses that which exists and parsing the language, removing the fallacies. And you don't have to be, in anyone's face about it. You just need to know for yourself that there are unclarities. There are some contradictions that yet to be, worked out. And you do that with questions. And so when Kevin's talking about, the history of the trivium, it's being used predominantly through history as crowd control, as mind control. And that's why we need to learn how to think as individuals and not be part of that collective. Now, the other part that I'm going to cut to this document, Cam, is Philo's reply to questions concerning his association with the Illuminati. Now, this is Baron Adolf von Knigge, and this is written back in the 1700s. Now, he was a member of the Illuminati, and it says explicitly in here, in his letters, how they were using the Illuminati to take over Freemasonry. And then what Kevin just cited was the Bavarian king of Prussia, Frederick the Great, picks all of this up, and this comes forward, and it gets enabled through our school system because it's the Prussian education system. So when you're talking about ideas like kindergarten, you can't just go to the official story of this is the guy who started kindergarten. You have to look at who his teachers were, where this whole line of philosophy of breaking children's curiosity, breaking their individuality, and instilling the collective mentality comes from, and what it's being used for. Because John said there were too many allusions, too many pieces of history that would need to be alluded to, referenced during that conversation, and he felt that that's a whole conversation or a whole book on its own. So we took that as a challenge to better elucidate for ourselves, for our own edification, to understand these ideas. And in reading the actual transcripts of the letters that are written back in the day in the primary sources, you find that there's a lot more validity to this than basically has ever been expressed in any single book that we've ever seen. Tony, I know you had a couple of things to say, and there's a little time lapse difference, so I'm going to give you this opportunity right now to have peace and quiet on our end so you can say what you want to say. Here you go.
I'm sorry, with the delay, it's very difficult because I really had like 2 quick words to say that from what Kevin was referencing, or just quick phrases. So sorry, but that's something we're going to have to seriously look at. But I was going to say, I think Aristotle was, at least he's attributed to being from Macedonia. And Macedonia is kind of like, if we study the contextual history of Macedonia, I hate to use this term, but they're kind of like rednecks. The history is a very moral culture put away back from the city-states. So unfortunately, the whole culture around which he was surrounded was very extremely probably a bit of racist, but really they believed in slavery. They believed in a woman's being a sort of secondary citizen. And so I think it's a lot of cultural context. What he did as far as formulating logic and language and syllogisms and deduction, although he didn't talk much about induction, but all the different aspects of logic that he kind of codified, I think those still remain consistent. But Kevin is 100% correct as far as that we can't we have to take the best of what they did and kind of leave the cultural contextual issues that I know we all deal with in our own times, even not in that case, but there's always something that kind of colors our reality a little bit that we can't see through. All of us have this misconceptions, not the misconceptions that Aristotle had. That's from a different time and a different place in history, but I mean it just comes with the color of the context of the culture, So it is interesting, but yeah, that is correct. Aristotle was definitely for slavery and for I don't want to say belittled women, but definitely saw women as a secondary sort of species, something that they had their own place for.
You can only use logic to justify any conclusion if you refuse to define your terms up front. It's the definition of terms, the mutual definition of terms in communication that locks it all down and makes progress, and communication, effective and efficient and mutually satisfactory, because both people who are in a line of communication, if it's a minimum of 2, have needs that need to be met, and we use words to express ourselves to get those needs met. And we replicate it. We can run little experiments by turning something upside down and watching cause and effect. It's not too entertaining, but it is there just in case you need a reminder. So we've talked about a lot. We've talked about John's recovery. That's going well. We're talking about our understanding of these various different types of philosophy. Some are wielded as weapons to take away the volition of others, and others are so that individuals can have intellectual self-defense and maybe prevent their rights and volition from being abridged or violated. This is a continuing conversation, but we are in the process of learning this all for ourselves. And I'm just going to give everyone a chance for closing comments. I'm going to go first to Nick because I think he has the longest Skype delay. Over.
Read you. Houston, we don't have a problem. But I do want to add a couple of things. So firstly is, again, from yesterday, the idea that have created things. So Twitter as an institution was not only compromised by technology, but actually enabled by technology. Or rather, the Twitter revolutions were not only compromised by technology, but enabled by technology. So today, not only have we been spied on by Skype, but we've been able to talk to each other through Skype. Secondly, just on the redneck comment, I thought that was pretty funny. And I just wondered if there was anything that would be similar if you grew up in a coal mining town and you were quote unquote a rugged individual, any attributes that were similar. And on that note, what does he always say? Write your own script or act in someone else's. But more and more in my own life, and this is what I'd like to close on, is the philosophy, and it is a philosophy, of dismiss the arbitrary. Over.
I had buttons pushed. Dismiss the arbitrary is the single most important thing I think anyone can learn how to do, and learn daily how to improve doing that, because dismissing the arbitrary has to do with identifying and defining the noise and organizing those contradictions into a pile and sweeping them out the door, not exposing yourself to as much noise, exposing yourself to more signal. And that's what dismissing the arbitrary is about. It's about recognizing when someone's trying to use language to deceive you. You don't have to dismiss them right away. You can listen to everything they have to say, but you are dismissing the gravamen, the weight that you are taking on mentally from their words, because you know that they might be deceiving you, and you've already received several indicators in their first couple statements, whether it's a so-called presidential candidate that's going to, impress you through their rhetoric on TV, or it's your neighbor telling you that, the chem lawn, all this poison on your lawn is not a bad thing for your family or your pets, or even if you're growing food, especially. That's, one of the most antithetical things you can do to your yard. You have this piece of property, you can develop it, and we're all learning how to develop both our mental property and our physical property in life, and that's what this journey is all about. Kevin, I'm going to cut to you for any closing comments and words, and then we'll cut back to Tony, and then we'll probably wrap it up, because I'm sure Lisa will say that. Maybe we'll be surprised.
I have been sick all week, and I just had chicken soup a little while ago, and I just don't really have a lot to add.
That's all great.
An hour ago,
That's
may have.
more than we all expected. See right there. It's just good to see your smiling face here.
Thank everyone for their support.
I thank you for all your hard work this week.
Energy for that.
You've been going above and beyond, and you definitely deserve a little break. So
but I won't get it. Just if anyone's wondering. I don't really need it.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it was a stimulating discussion, and look forward to continuing along these lines in the future. Hopefully we can work out some of the delay issues, and we can maybe bring it to a fruitful conclusion and work on some project out of it. For any researchers out there, for the comments that have been said about Hegel, I would definitely recommend looking into Jakob Berma, and I would also like to point out that Hegel himself was instructed and mentored by members of the Bavarian Illuminati. Now, as you learn about the Illuminati and you learn about how people are compartmentalized, and it was very profitable to have certain people within institutions, you should look into Friedrich von Abel. He was also a collegiate professor of Schelling, but he's listed in several reference books that I found as taking on Hegel as a child as his protege. So the philosophical tradition preceding Hegel, with Jakob Berma and Friedrich von Abel and many of the others in the environment there, are worth researching. It's not to negate all of Hegel's work just because people have used his philosophy and the derivative philosophies that he has acquired. We shouldn't dismiss everybody outright, but when you see that these philosophies are being used in a destructive manner, I think we need to call it out, and call it out right away, and try to get to the common ground, if there is any, and move forward.
Well, and it's also important for other people to recognize if fallacies in progress, deception in progress. It's good to be surrounded by other people who understand what you're saying, and not have a bunch of people say, well, you're a conspiracy theorist. Well, that's a shortcut to thinking if you say that. So we're going to have to end the conversation. Tony, do you have any?
Tony, I would like to thank you for leaving that chicken because I did make a delicious chicken soup, a nice bone broth.
She needed it, yeah, a little bone broth.
And I've been eating that for the last 24 hours. So
thank God. Thank God. It's the very least I can do, as you know. With everything that's happened, that's the absolute least I could have done. And I'm just glad I got to taste a little bit of it before I left last night. So you did a wonderful job preparing it and making it, and I thank you very much for doing that. And I hope you feel better, because I'm sorry, that night that I came back and dropped off the card and whatnot, that was... I just, sleeping through the night, I knew you were having trouble.
Tony
and I just knew I could
for
chicken
those of you
soup.
playing at home, Tony tried to leave for like 3 days, and every time he would get ready to leave, something else would happen, and so it was kind of comical. We didn't care. It's like he's on his own schedule. He can come and go whenever he needs to. He's got like a 5 or 6 hour drive. He's trying to time it so he's missing construction. So the one night he drove out and he gets into construction, he's like, I could just, be here for 6 hours. So I'm going to turn around. He came back, and, so finally he made it home last night safely. And we're thankful for all of his help and care.
And I would just like to say thanks to Nick.
We received while he's home. Go ahead.
So I just wanted to say thanks to Nick. I guess besides Chris Payne, I think this is the first call casual cafe, where we've had someone else that's obviously we're familiar with and we've communicated before and often shared insights and perspectives. But it was a wonderful conversation tonight, and thank you, Nick, for participating. I really appreciate it. It's been wonderful, and honestly, thank you, Lisa, Rich, and Kevin, for putting up with the delay and me talking over people, not hearing things. And I promise for the Tragedy and Hope community that we'll continue to look into this, because Rich and I think, have sat in front of the Ustream software for more than a couple of days, still scratching our heads. So we'll work it out one of these days, I'm sure. But thank you, everyone, and the community, and Nick, and everyone.
I appreciate Nick. I appreciate Nick putting up with the time delay difference. I especially appreciate anyone who's watching this who had to put up with the time delay difference and the occasional speaking over each other. We're still trying to leverage the technology that is available to us at this price level to its maximum degree, because we don't really have more budget to spend on trying to fix, different problems. So we're trying to be creative, and that's part of this situation. And you're witnessing the ongoing struggle of our creativity. So I would like to thank Nick and Tony for tuning in on the Skype here. And I'd like to thank Kevin and Lisa for being here in person in the office. And on behalf of everyone here at Tragedy and Hope, which is 2 people at this desk usually, I would like to bid you good night, and we will be back to talk with you soon.